Hi everyone, it's Victoria Carter, and today we're going to talk about ratings and like trigger warnings in books. Should they have them or should they not? Now, I have a really interesting opinion on this, but I wanted to look up the opposite side. So, I think that books should have trigger warnings or they should have some kind of rating system. And but I don't want to get into why I think that. I want to get into the opposite side because if you're looking at an argument, you should always see what the other people are thinking about and what their thought process is. So some of the arguments I came across as to why books should not have a trigger is number one is spoilers because, if the book's about someone dying or grief or, has violence in it, that can be a huge spoiler for the book. I mean, if you guys ever watched episodes of Game of Thrones and you saw like, oh, violence in this episode or something like that, like I always paid attention to that because I was like, oh, what's going to happen in this episode? I want to know. And it's true, there can be some spoilers with that sort of thing, but I don't think that it's going to matter. But that was number one reason why people thought, no trigger warnings in books. The second reason is because people, that said no to trigger warnings or any kind of rating system in books is because books give us a chance to talk about subjects or, experiences that we would choose not to talk about, otherwise. So, for example, if a book discusses racism and you don't really know that from the plot, like the racism part is like an undertone of the book, but you wouldn't get that from like a romance book or something like that. And then the book talks a lot about like how people deal with racist situations and things like that. Someone may not pick it up. And the answer to those people's to validate them is saying, we should read books to expand how we see the world, see other people's perspectives. And if it talks about something that we don't feel comfortable with, we might not pick it up. But if it says like, oh, this is a romance book set in, the early 1800s or something like that, and then it features racism, it's a feature, not a plot point. So why should we bring it up? And then, a couple other things that they talked about were, with trigger warnings in books is, I think that there was an issue on what people determined as a trigger because everybody's triggers are different. And someone who's truly triggered by something may not be triggered by something that someone else is triggered by. So for example, maybe, I read this article about this dog who went through some abuse as a puppy, and he did not like it when he saw neon lights, and he did not like it when he saw men in uniform with sunglasses. Like the dog got really nervous. I thought that was so interesting. I was like, I didn't know the dogs could do that. They had those experiences. And, are you going to look up everyone's triggers and put, oh, this book contains mentions of neon lights? No, you're not going to do that because how could you know that that's someone's trigger? You see what I mean? So that's their argument. My argument is I think that they should, but I think people are looking at it the wrong way. So just like movies have a G, PG, PG-13, R, I think it goes higher than that. I don't know what goes after that, but there are certain ramifications that fall into each category. So I think I mentioned this on my channel before, but one of my favorite books is by Holly Black and it's called The Darkest Part of the Forest. And I was reading the book and I realized it said the F word 3 times. Now, aside from that, there is nothing in the book, I feel like, that would qualify it for an R rating. But in a movie, if you can say the F word 3 times, it's automatically an R-rated book. Or R-rated movie. Excuse me. R-rated movie. If you say the F word 3 times, it's R-rated. And then depending on how graphic the violence is, it can also be R-rated. Or how open they are about, like, intimacy. It can be an R-rated show as well. But this Holly Black book, if I were to watch it as a movie, depending on how they portrayed the action sequences between the characters, I would rate it as probably a PG-13. You know, it talks about teenagers with not drugs, alcohol, and things like that. And those things would qualify that book as a PG-13 movie. But because Holly Black uses the F word 3 times, it would technically be an R-rated movie, if it was a movie. Which as of now, it is not a movie. It's just a book, which I hope they make it into a movie. That's beside the point. So I think people are looking at it the wrong way, and I think that there should be certain things in books because YA is not edited for content. Middle grade is, and like kid literature is, they're all edited for content, especially because children, like 8, 9, 10-year-olds, oftentimes can't understand a lot of complicated language. So sometimes editors, if they have those kind of books, they'll like highlight those words that are like, okay, this is a word that an adult would use, not a 10-year-old. You need to change this word and make it into a 10-year-old. Also in middle grade and kidlit, the romances are at the most, I would say, like kissing on the cheek or like holding hands, but nothing beyond that. And then the violence, if you've seen any Disney movie, you know this, the violence is not bloody. And including in Marvel movies, there's not any blood because it's a Disney-owned franchise. And if there was blood, its rating would go from a PG or a PG-13 to an R because of blood. Which you could easily make it, those films, an R-rated film, and then you're cutting off people that would watch it. Now they're not going to watch it because of the rating. And I think that is a good point to see is like, okay, well, where do we draw the line in the sand with triggers and with rating books? Can we safely say, like, this book has intimacy, this book has extreme violence, and things like that? Or will that ruin the book? And I think that there are certain books that I wish I hadn't read all the way through. There was a certain book, rather long book, well-known author, I won't say who. I do remember the book this time, where the bad guy, I feel like he's a cheap villain, in my opinion, because he hurts children. And I was like, that's a cheap shot. Like, you could make a bad guy without having him be, like, hurting a child. But he does. He hurts children. That's part of, like, who he is as a bad guy. And I wish that I wouldn't have read that because I don't feel like I missed out on anything. And that's the other thing with a movie is, like, for example, they have this service called VidAngel now where you can skip through scenes that you don't want to watch, but you can't do that with a book. You have to sit there and read it to get to the next part because you don't know when that part ends. And if you go too far, you've lost information and such like this. So I think that personally, books should have some kind of rating system similar to movies where it's like, oh, you know, it says these words, or, you know, it's like non-gory violence or gory violence, which would be blood, or it has like intimacy. I think that they should have those in there because there are certain things that certain people just don't want to read. And you can put it in there without putting in spoilers. Like if you want to discuss discrimination, you don't have to put that in there, but maybe you could say, you know, this book has violence against a minority group. And that wouldn't really spoil anything. in my opinion. So I'd like to see what you guys think about rating systems and trigger warnings in books. I think they should be there. Do you think they should be there? Let's talk about it. All right. I'll see you next time, but guys. And remember, every victory is a victory. Bye.